Stand at your window and look out at the city lights. Somewhere in that scattered constellation, someone is falling in love for the first time. Someone else is receiving news that will split their life into before and after. A child is learning to read, sounding out letters that will unlock entire worlds. Each of these moments arrives with the weight of absolute importance, as if the universe itself has paused to witness. And in a sense, it has. Within the radius of that person's life, nothing could matter more. The sensation is not an illusion. When you experience something profound, you are not mistaken about its profundity. The error comes later, in a different direction entirely. We spend our lives building narratives, not consciously perhaps, but continuously. You remember the teacher who believed in you, and that memory shapes how you think about your own capabilities. You remember the time you failed spectacularly, and that failure becomes a cautionary landmark in the geography of your choices. These memories link together into something like a story, with themes and turning points, patterns and meanings. This story is how you know who you are. The strange thing is that this story, which feels so solid and so central, exists at a very particular scale. It functions beautifully at the scale of one human life, of personal relationships, of the choices you face each day. But it does not scale up. It was never designed to. Zoom out from your life to your neighborhood, and already the details begin to blur. Your specific reasons for choosing your career, your particular heartbreaks, the small kindnesses you've offered and received, these start to fade into broader patterns. At the neighborhood scale, you become part of demographic trends, housing statistics, traffic flows. Continue zooming out, and the dissolution accelerates. At the scale of your city, you are one data point among millions. At the scale of your country, you are a nearly invisible thread in vast historical tapestries woven from economics, politics, and collective movements. At the scale of your species, you are a single breath in a conversation that has been going on for 300,000 years. And at the scale of the cosmos, even our species itself is a brief flowering on one small planet, a momentary arrangement of matter that learned, improbably, to look back at itself. This is where the temptation toward despair usually arrives. If nothing I do matters at large scales, if my story vanishes when we zoom out far enough, then doesn't that mean my life is meaningless? Doesn't it render all my struggles and achievements equally pointless? But notice what this question assumes. It assumes that for something to matter, it must matter everywhere, at every scale, forever. It assumes that significance must be infinite or it is nothing. This assumption, when you look at it directly, is rather strange. We do not apply it anywhere else. The fact that your conversation with a friend matters intensely to both of you is not diminished because it does not matter to someone in a different country. The beauty of a sunset is not reduced because it will not be visible from the next town over. Mattering is always contextual. It always has a radius. What if we took this seriously? What if we accepted that our personal narratives have a natural scale at which they operate, and that this is not a flaw but simply a description of how meaning works? At the scale of your own life, your narrative is not just important, it is the foundational importance. It determines what you notice and what you overlook. It shapes what feels possible and what feels forbidden. It colors every experience with history and expectation. This narrative is your primary tool for navigating reality, for making decisions, for connecting with others, for creating anything at all. Within its proper radius, it is supreme. The people closest to you live at the edge of this radius, where your narrative and theirs overlap. Your story matters immensely to them because it intersects with their own story. The way you show up in the world creates ripples that touch them directly. Your kindness or cruelty, your presence or absence, your growth or stagnation, these things have weight in their experience. Not because your story has somehow managed to matter at a larger scale, but because at this intimate scale, stories naturally interweave, move outward, and your influence becomes less direct, but no less real. The work you do, the art you make, the ideas you share, the systems you participate in, these extend your story's radius through connection and consequence. A teacher affects students who go on to affect others. A programmer writes code that shapes how millions interact. A parent raises children who will carry forward certain values and reject others. These extensions are real effects, but notice that they work by your story dissolving into other stories, by your specific narrative becoming abstracted into principles, practices, patterns. Here's what makes this recognition liberating rather than diminishing. Once you stop insisting that your narrative must matter at scales where it cannot, you become free to fully inhabit the scale where it does. So much of our suffering comes from this category error, from demanding that our personal story be legible at every altitude. We exhaust ourselves trying to make our mark on history, to ensure we are remembered, to achieve a significance that transcends our actual radius of influence. We compare our intimate, detailed, felt experience of our own lives to the simplified, zoomed-out versions we see of others, and we feel inadequate. But what if the task is not to expand your narrative's radius indefinitely, but to live fully within the radius you have? What if significance is not something to be achieved at larger and larger scales, but something to be inhabited with increasing depth at the scale that is actually yours? This does not mean accepting a small life in any limiting sense. It means recognizing that your life operates at human scale, and that human scale is the scale at which consciousness, love, learning, beauty, and meaning primarily exist. The universe may be vast and old and indifferent, but you do not live at the scale of the universe. You live at the scale of days and conversations, of meals shared and skills learned, of ideas encountered and choices made. When you are fully present to someone who is suffering, your story and their story briefly occupy the same small radius, and in that radius, nothing matters more than this moment of connection. When you finally understand something you have struggled with for months, that breakthrough happens at exactly the scale where your narrative operates, and it is entirely real. When you create something, a meal, a garden, a line of code, a sentence, a gesture of care, you are not trying to matter cosmically. You are simply living at the scale where human beings actually live, where our stories actually function. The larger scales do not negate this. They simply operate according to different principles. At large scales, individual narratives dissolve into patterns, but patterns are made of individuals. Cultures emerge from millions of personal stories, even as each story becomes invisible in the culture. Evolution works on populations even though it is lived by organisms. History is made of moments even though historians speak of eras. The small scale is not less real because the large scale exists. They are simply different lenses on the same reality. And here is perhaps the deepest comfort. The invisibility of your narrative at large scales means you are free from the tyranny of needing it to be visible there. You do not have to be remembered by history. You do not have to achieve fame or recognition beyond your natural radius. You do not have to justify your existence at cosmic scales. You can simply live well within the radius that is actually yours, attending to what is actually in front of you, connecting with who is actually present, creating what you are actually moved to create. This is not resignation. This is precision. This is understanding where you actually exist and what you actually have the power to affect. Your story vanishes at large scales, not because it is insignificant, but because significance itself is scale dependent. What matters at one altitude simply does not register at another, and this is as it should be. So tend to your radius. Live your narrative fully, knowing it does not need to be larger than it is to be enough. Love the people within reach. Do the work in front of you. Create beauty at the scale where you can actually touch it. Learn what your particular mind can actually grasp. Give what your particular life has made you capable of giving. The lights you saw from your window are still there, each one marking a radius of significance, a story that matters absolutely within its own scale. Yours is one of those lights. It does not need to outshine the others. It does not need to be visible from space. It only needs to shine steadily in the small circle that is its own, illuminating what is actually there to be seen. That is enough. That has always been enough.